Hi, welcome to Nat Corner. You can watch my videos, read my blogs on natcorner.com. Also, you can watch my videos on my YouTube channel, natcorner-2223. Please subscribe and click on bell icon to get latest notifications about my videos. In this video, we'll create a simple Lambda project in .NET 6.0 using AWS Lambda templates. Then we will install the NuGet package aws.lambda.api gateway events. Then we will further modify the Lambda function to accept the gateway proxy request and send an API gateway proxy response. Once the changes are done, we will deploy that Lambda function. Then we will see what is AWS gateway is about, how you can create a simple REST API using AWS gateway in the console. Then we will associate the REST API to the Lambda function that we have deployed. Then we will test and deploy that particular REST API in the staging environment of our choice. And then we will see what is the use case, why we have to deploy a Lambda function and access it with AWS Gateway, in which scenario it will be beneficial for us. So we open Visual Studio 2022. We'll go and click on create a new project. We'll search for Lambda empty function template. Okay. Then we will give the name sample Lambda with API gateway. Click next. Here we have to provide the profile name and region. Once you enter the profile and region, you need to click continue to create the project. If you are not familiar what this profile is about, you can watch my previous video on AWS Lambda basics. The project got created. This is the Lambda function name, and all it does is it takes an input and it converts it into a uppercase. Now we'll modify this particular Lambda function to accept a API gateway proxy request and then send back an API gateway proxy response. In order to do that, first we'll have to install the NuGet package. So we have to install amazon.lambda.api gateway events. Select the project, click on install. So once it got installed, modify that request to API gateway proxy request. Add the necessary namespace now using the gateway, and then okay. Now this Lambda function is ready to accept any request that is passed using API gateway proxy request class. Okay, and it will what we have to return is we'll create a simple sample API gateway response. API gateway proxy response. So proxy response generally expects like we can send these kind of variables. Like one is the body, like what is the body that you want to send back to the API. What are the headers? If you have any response headers that you want to send back, whether it is a base64 encoded, then if you have multi-value headers that you want to send back, and what is the status code, like for example, like if it is success, say you want to send it as status code as 200, then you want to send a body, sample body, say for example hello from Lambda using API gateway. Okay, so these are the changes we did, and the type is now API gateway proxy response. Okay, so now just that we created the simple Lambda function to accept a request from API gateway proxy as well as send a response using the same. Now we have to deploy this particular Lambda function. So the .NET Lambda deploy function is a command which we can use to deploy the Lambda function that you created just now. Okay, now the function got compiled, published, and deployed. Okay, so now that Lambda function got deployed here, we can see that in the function handler against function handler. It got updated 14 seconds back. Now we'll test this function handler Lambda function using an API gateway. Okay. So what is an API gateway by Amazon? Okay, it is a serverless compute service which can enable you to create and deploy your own REST and WebSocket APIs at any scale. You can create robust, secure, and scalable APIs that access AWS or other web services as well as data that's stored in AWS cloud. So, for example, like you want any REST service created on top of your S3 data or on top of your CloudWatch logs also if required, like you want some custom data that you want to extract from those logs and you want to create also, you can do that. Okay, and then you can create these APIs to use in your own client applications or make your APIs available to third-party app developers. And the best part is in AWS Gateway free tier, you have 1 million REST API calls per month to use. So and these are free, like right. So you will be in AWS Gateway, you will be charged for the number of API calls you receive, and that is around 1 million. So for a chota mota developers or the people who wants to learn AWS serverless compute services and all, this is a great offering. We can make use of it. Okay, so now we will just see how we can create a simple AWS gateway, API gateway. So I'm in already in API gateway service. Okay, we'll click on create API. So you will see here all the different type of API types that you can create, like this HTTP, WebSocket, REST API. Okay, we will use REST API. This is REST API private. What we are using is REST API, most common used. Okay, so it's a new API. Give a name, say like it is sample Lambda API. You can give the description, region. It endpoint is regional. If it is a private, you mark it as private. For us, it is regional. We'll create it. Okay. Then in the actions, you have to define what is the type of that method. Say right now, what are the sample Lambda that we are trying? It is by default sending a gateway response saying like hello from. It's like kind of get method, right? We are not asking explicitly to post some data and return back some information based on that, right? So this is the get type. Okay, so we are selecting a simple get service. Okay, now here you see here the integration type is where you are mentioning that I am creating this REST API in API gateway to connect that or integrate that with a Lambda function. Okay, and then you have to make sure you select this use Lambda proxy integration. Basically, if you don't do that, the API gateway will not respond, or the Lambda function will not respond to this invocation properly. Okay, and your Lambda region and the Lambda name. So when you start typing the characters, it will automatically give you the type of Lambda names that matches with you. So function handler is the Lambda that we have deployed short while ago. Okay, I click on save. Now we are able to see that Lambda function associated with an API gateway REST endpoint. Okay, now you can click on test here. Okay, you can see here like hello from Lambda using API gateway. Okay, there is a small typo. Maybe we can correct it next time when we test. Okay, so now the status is 200. The hello response body, the response body came here. The status code what you sent here in the response body in the .NET code that have appeared here, the status code, and the body has appeared in the response body. If you have added any response headers on your own, that will come. Otherwise, the default response headers are appearing here. Okay, so now once you test your default API, you have to deploy it. You can select your stage, like I click dev and click on deploy. Okay, now this is the endpoint URL to invoke my Lambda function using an API gateway. Now if you see here, when I click on that link, hello from Lambda using API gateway, this is the exact response what we have sent using the Lambda function source code. Okay, so with this we are able to we create a simple Lambda function using .NET Core 6.0. We have seen how to deploy this particular function using .NET command, and then we have seen how to create a simple REST API using API gateway, associate that to a Lambda function so that you can invoke the Lambda function using the API REST endpoint. So what is a good use case where we can see that okay, this usage will help us? Okay, like we try to say, for example, you want to create a Lambda function to create connectivity with DynamoDB, and then invoke that Lambda function from API gateway so that you can make your DB layer serverless using AWS serverless compute services like API gateway and Lambda. Now remember, keep the returned data set to less in size and faster retrieval. The reason behind that is, as you remember, that Lambda will bill you based on the computation, okay, and whereas API gateway will bill you based on the number of APIs that you hit to it. So one best use case is that where you want to build a serverless architecture website where you want to manage the database using AWS DynamoDB and expose the data sets that you want to play with or work with using Lambda function and access it from API gateway. So that's it in this video. Happy coding.